Nice.
He just brought up a good point about company name and everything. I never said anything to them about coming on, so we just won't say where I work.
Yeah, don't say Builder's First Source. Just say he's a
design manager.
Design manager.
Yeah.
And designs floor systems. Now, are you involved?
What's your
with
last name?
Fennimore. Fennimore.
Okay.
Do you deal with roof trusses now too?
What did you say? Designer of?
Design manager for floors and roofs.
Floor systems, roof systems.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay.
And a musician.
And he plays the drums.
This.
Which I'd rather do full time.
For how long have you been doing that? Just so I can kind of.
Jeez.
Not the musician part.
No. 22 years now.
Wow.
Okay.
22 years.
You're old too. I like that.
Yeah, I am old.
Okay.
Wait till
Did you do a sound check at all?
Yeah. If you say 30 years.
Test.
You're just fine.
Test. Why does mine always get so saggy?
Sounds like a personal problem.
Yeah, this one's like it's always like limp dick.
Sounds like a personal problem.
Yeah. Why don't I just get the fucked up ones? You're the best. All right. How do you spell your first name?
J-O-H-N.
Okay, so not J-O-N. Okay. It's easy. We have one of each at work. A J-O-N.
I have the same.
So
We have the same.
people are like, how else would you spell? I'm like, J-O-N? I'm like,
Come
okay.
on, there's two ways.
yeah.
All right, let's rock.
Okay.
All right, welcome. I'm Chuck Insalaco with Real Estate Matters.
And I'm Georgette, and we're coming to you live this Wednesday evening from Wildfire Radio's.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah.
I forgot we're not live. That's awesome. All right, welcome. This is Real Estate Matters. I'm your host, Chuck Insalaco.
And I'm Georgette, and we're coming to you live this Wednesday evening from Wildfire Radio Studios to discuss what's happening in the world of real estate this week.
Remember, we're not here to sell you anything. We're here to inform, enlighten, and coach you. We want to talk about what's happening in the world of real estate and investing.
So last week, Chuck and I, it was just you and me, we were chatting about millennials and zillennials and how the desire for home buying has kind of shifted from the millennial rental desire to the kind of zillennials who are more interested in buying. And so what's cool about that is our generation, or the next generation I should say, is kind of a little bit more interested in some of the things that haven't really gone away, like that whole open floor plan concept. So it's as much as even when you're moving from a rental to your own home, that's something that's really one of those desirable. I don't know if you ever watch those HGTV shows, but the first thing that they say is, we'd like an open floor plan concept.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what everybody talks about and wants. And when you see it day after day everywhere on TV, even the houses you see in TV shows are like that. So people tend to want that. And I see it all the time in the renovation work I do. That's what people want to do. They want to take walls out. They want to open up kitchens. They want to open up family rooms so that they can, have the benefit. The parents maybe can see the kids in the family room while they're in the kitchen, making dinner or whatever like that. So, and I think that the Lennar's program that we talked about was really instrumental. And I think it's something that the market's going to have to adapt to the rest of the market. I think that's really something that if you hadn't listened to last week's show, I would tune in to the podcast.
If you want to listen to last week's show or any of our prior podcasts, you can head on over to remattersradio.com, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn under the same RE Matters Radio. And every week we release a poll. We release who's coming on each week, so you guys can follow along and comment on us live on Facebook.
Yep. So it's now October, and You know how I feel about the winter. I absolutely hate it. I'm not looking forward to it, and I have 3 big projects starting that I started in late September, which is not really ideal, but I just hope it's going to be a mild winter.
I don't know, with the hurricane season and everything, I mean, the weather's just still in the 80s, so, and it's, I remember one October it was short sleeves and tank tops, and then the next October it was snowing on Halloween.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the almanac, I'm sure you read the almanac all the time.
Was that sarcasm? Are you kidding me right now?
You know what the almanac is?
Oh, the Farmer's Almanac?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've never heard of it. Sorry,
Just
please.
making sure.
Why don't you mansplain that to me and tell me what that is?
But it's supposed to be a mild winter.
Skips right over that one.
Well, I don't want to get into the whole mansplaining thing. We all know what that is.
So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm hoping for mild winter as well. We are also slammed, as you were saying before. We have a lot of renovations and new construction. Luckily, we just kind of work in the design aspect of it, but we kind of do the same thing with those open floor plans and those concepts. So, luckily, and kind of as a segue into that, is that we have someone who is. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I get from my clients a lot is the question of, and you're an engineer, and you can probably talk to this really well. I get, is this the best time of year to build? Is this the right time of the year to build? Is this a good time of year to build? Isn't it better to build in the summer? And my answer is always that the technology's kind of caught up with the concepts that, now we can pour concrete in the winter when it's cold. We can do different things. So the technology's caught up with the concepts. So I always explain to people that it doesn't matter what time of the year it is. Of course, if I'm renovating a home that someone's living in, and they have to be inconvenient with weather and all that, that's a problem. But in general, would you agree that, there's really no difference between time of year and building?
With the exception of rain and snow delays, honestly, I'd agree with that. I mean, and even if it's below 40 degrees, we have certain techniques that we can make sure are implemented for when you're curing concrete, anything lower than that, or, you just got to wait for some things, you have to bleed more water when it's colder and all those kinds of techniques. But other than that, it doesn't really, I think that those days are kind of gone. Also, technologically, we have found out ways that we can make sure that everything is installed properly regardless of the weather.
Yeah, and the way products are maintained now before we even get them on the site is way better than it was just 15 or 20 years ago when materials are delivered to the site. Whether it's conventional lumber or engineered lumber, it's generally wrapped now in a protective covering so weather doesn't impact it, and you can't get mold and things like that. So I always tell people, is it the ideal condition to build through the winter? No, but as long as the process is managed properly, it's really no different.
I think there's four big factors that people consider or myths, I guess I'll call them, when people are scared about building in the wintertime. And that includes, like you said, the lumber, like you were just saying, concrete, like I was just saying, workmanship in the wintertime, and I'm going to say cost. And I think those are myths that, the first two we just debunked right now, that, with concrete and with lumber protection. Workmanship, obviously, as time goes on, we're better at being able to, work through the humidity and through the cold. So regardless of deep summer or deep winter, we're still able to work through it.
Well, over the course of the years, I've asked my guys, does it matter to you to build in October? Does it matter to you to be out here? And they actually prefer cold over hot. So, from a workmanship standpoint, I don't know that it's any different. But what I will say this, one of the 4 things you mentioned, cost is definitely more in the winter because
Right.
you have to make different provisions in the winter than you do in the summer. So, I always, when I have a project that's going through winter, in my spreadsheet, I always add a winter expense. And that could be, 2 to 3% of the cost.
Right. So, but I will say those are kind of like the biggest questions that we always get asked when we're designing something, is that if they're in a rush, and their rush purpose is because of that, one of those 4 reasons. And we always tell them, technology is really advanced to the point where it's not really going to affect it that much.
Right.
So, and generally they're probably going to additionally spend more than 2 or 3% on add-ons as the project goes on anyway.
The other thing that's happened, which is, I'll give you the segue now, is, the building materials have changed dramatically in the last 15 or 20 years. I've said this on the show a million times, and that is that when it comes to building a house, the old saying that they don't build them like they used to, I don't think applies. It applies for certain products, but in general, I would rather have a home that's built today with today's products as it pertains to longevity and the ability to keep things level and square than the way homes were built 100 years ago.
I would second that. I mean, when you look at homes, I bought a house that was built in the 1920s, and my ceiling joists and my floor joists, well, actually my ceiling joists the most, were sagging so badly. It was
because they were undersized.
Right, exactly, because they weren't capable of handling, I guess, the width of the house. And so before even being able to re-rock everything, I had to make sure that all my I had to basically sister up every joist with an i-joist.
And it's because it was what we call conventional lumber, which is everybody out there knows what a 2x10, a 2x4, or 2x6 is. You know, I can remember I bought an old house as well once to renovate into an office, and we gutted it. And when we took the ceiling down, every roof rafter was a different size. And it turns out that this home that I bought years and years ago was a farmhouse. And you could tell that the guy repaired his roof with whatever he had in the barn. You know, like one member was, a 1x6, the other member was a 2x8. You know, it was, so I'm a firm believer in the products that we use today and the way we do things today.
So actually, what I was saying about my own house is about at one point was that those i-joists were actually built. Those were actually created in 1969. That's how old those are.
Wow.
And that was basically someone kind of designed it. It's two. I mean, I guess we'll let our expert kind of talk a little bit more about this, but there's two pieces to it, right? So there's the web piece and the flange piece, and so that's kind of what makes it a lot stronger. And it's almost, what is it, 50% stronger? I mean, I could be off on that percentage. On that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our expert before I misspeak a little bit. So John Fennimore, thank you for joining us. He is a design manager for both flooring and roofing systems for over 24 years. John, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in, John. Appreciate it.
Yes,
Appreciate you taking
absolutely.
the time. I'm really excited to have you here because, you know, you and I talk all the time. I'm biased. John's my designer on all my products, but he's definitely a wealth of knowledge. And the reason I wanted to have him on the show was for our listeners, I constantly get questions about products and what's the best product to use in it for a different condition. And you know, one of the biggest products that I've adopted in all of my construction, residential construction, is the new floor joist systems that we use today compared to conventional lumber.
Sure. No, it has definitely changed building.
Right.
It's made things a lot easier on the framers. You don't really have to worry about, checking the lumber, making sure your crowns and all that stuff. You can just throw this stuff up. It's light. It's easier to carry. You can do the longer spans. You work with that where they use continuity. So, the longer you can run the i-joists in one piece, the better the performance you're going to get out of the floor.
Right.
Because you're getting more bearing locations and it's keeping everything a lot stiffer rather than dealing with all the simple spans.
Let's start with what Georgette was talking about. For a lot of people, when they look at a 2x10, which is a 1.5 by 9 1/4 inch piece of lumber, which is actually cut out of a tree trunk, right? Those things can twist, they can bow. As they dry out, everybody has seen a piece of wood laying on the side of the road that ends up all twisted and
Sure.
But the important part, one of the important features, is strength. And a lot of times people will look at these what I call manufactured floor systems, and they'll see this 1/2 inch thick center member, and then the two flanges, the top and bottom flanges, and they're like, how could that be strong? Right. So explain that for our listeners.
Well, that goes back to the technology of steel I-beams. And when people ask me or have asked that question, I would ask them, would you rather have a piece of steel holding up your house, or would you rather have just some 2x10? Or I go, oh, I'd much rather have a piece of steel. So that in turn would lead me to say, well, then the I-joist works in the same fashion.
Right.
And the technology behind it is based off of steel I-beams.
So, I don't know if they still use this as a slogan, but I remember when TJI first started producing the I-joists, it used to actually be stamped right on it. It was called the silent floor.
Yep.
Right? Do they still stamp that? Because that was a pretty big statement to make. I haven't seen it lately.
No, that's an old slogan of theirs. I don't think they use it
Chuck
anymore.
just dated himself.
He dated me too. I remember it.
I think they've gone away from it because it's to me it's a marketing nightmare. But anyway, I actually adopted using the TJIs years ago. It was kind of a selfish reason. For me, what I first saw with it was that I would have less service, because ultimately, when I use a standard 2x10 conventional piece of lumber as a floor joist, over time, as that dries out, which all wood will,
Sure.
it's either going to twist or crown or bow, and when it does that, the nails that are in the subfloor
Start
pull
to
out, right? They pull out, and then ultimately you have a squeak in the floor. And what I liked about the silent floor was, number one, I used to be able to look at my customer in the basement and go, see what that says? You're not going to have squeaks in your floor.
Mm-hmm.
But I can attest now, after using them for 15 or 20 years, knock wood, I have to knock wood on this, because I have not had a callback on a squeaky floor.
No.
Would you agree with that?
I mean, they're very rare, and it's usually installation issues. It's never
I was just
because
gonna say, as long as it's installed properly,
Right.
as long as you're not, cutting them or chiseling them the wrong way, I think that you should be okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's always installation whenever there's an issue. It's either that or the biggest nightmare with them all is hangers. Always with the sitting in the hangers.
Yes.
You know, they never seat them right. They never put them in right. They never put all the nails in.
Properly sized.
And every time that we would go out on a floor issue and it would be some sort of a squeak or somebody would be complaining, it would always end up being, most of the time it would end up being something with the hanger, just not being installed properly.
Luckily, that's where we come in, where we get to all the contractors, any type of new product, obviously not now that i-joists have been around for forever, but our job is to kind of write the technical specification to say, this is the depth of the joist that you have to use, this is the type of hanger, this is the type of nail, this is the size of nail, this is exactly how it needs to be installed. And so our job is to kind of make sure that everything that you guys say has to happen, we make sure that it happens.
It's good.
Right. So the other thing is conventional lumber, a 2x10 or a 2x8, 2x12, we have charts, and those charts are span charts, and those charts tell us how far of a span we can put between the two ends of a 2x4, 2x6, 2x10. And you mentioned it in the beginning of the show that the other thing that the i-joist gives us is the ability to actually go further because of the strength of the design. From the design, you can go further. What's the typical? Is there a percentage that you would say is additional that the i-joist gives us?
I would say they get at least 30% more.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So in other words, if I'm building a house, or if somebody wants to take a wall out of a room, if they use a TJI or what we call an i-joist, they can probably go 30% more in width of a room without needing a post or some sort of a column.
That's really what everybody's looking for, and that's the way houses are designed these days too. They are maxing everything they can get out of those i-joists, so they can make houses deeper, put less supports in the basement, so you're having bigger, more wide open areas. You can finish and do whatever you want instead of having all these columns and beams and everything.
It's lighter to get in the house. It's easier to get into the house. I mean, from the builder's perspective, it's lighter than steel. It's not going to bow over a couple of years. And it can span a longer distance than any type of conventional lumber.
Right, and like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, that's what people want right now. So these are the products that we have to use almost to accomplish what people are looking for.
Yeah.
Another floor system that's probably been around longer is the web floor truss.
Yes.
Which how would you describe that for folks that maybe have never seen one? It's a very more engineered truss that.
Yeah, it's plated, and then it's more of like if you looked at it from the side, more of a W pattern, running up and down.
Right.
Which is.
So it doesn't have that solid member between
no.
the top and bottom plate. It has open webs, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's open in between with, the webbing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is, they all have their advantages, and there's a lot of advantages to using the open webs as well. Mainly, ductwork is a big thing, especially
if you're doing it for, not to interrupt, but if you're doing it, if you have if you're going to finish your basement,
mm-hmm.
to be able to hide that, or if you're going to try to move it so you're not having it cut out of a corner in a wall or visible, it's the best way that's the way that we do it.
And it's big now with these townhouses, and towns are big right now.
Space,
more of the tract home builders are putting towns up than they are singles.
Right.
Because people just can't afford the singles anymore. It's just too much. And in order to not have drop soffits throughout the whole
Basement.
not even the basement, the floors in between.
Right.
Because now you're moving into your main living space and you need to get, your HVAC runs through there. Nobody wants to lose any of the height in their ceilings. So they're using the open web so that you can build your HVAC chase right through. You can run everything right on through, hide it. Works out well.
Yeah, we were talking about my job this morning, the townhome job that I'm working on. And,
Yep.
the first building I built, I did use the web floor trusses, and it was ideal because, your basements today with poured concrete walls are 8 foot, and if you use a web floor system, you have really a full 8 foot. The basements that I finished off for folks in the townhomes ended up with an 8 foot ceiling, which is it's phenomenal.
And with towns now, a lot of times they're doing 2-zone anyway because some of them are 3 story tall. So
Right.
you're coming in from the attic and you're dropping down for your upper floors, and then you're coming up from the bottom to get everything you need for the the first and second.
Of those 2 floor systems, the i-joist and the web floor truss, is one more desirable than the other from the standpoint of strength or
It's not so
load
much.
capacity?
It's not so much strength. I think that people are looking at. It's more cost. I mean, the cost is where you're going to save.
Okay.
You're going to save money on the i-joist more than you would on the open webs
Okay.
as you get deeper. With the products, the deeper you start to get, sometimes it's better off using the open web.
And when you say deeper, just for folks listening, you mean that
The height-
basically the height
The
of
height
that.
of the actual member, whether it be 12, 14, 16, 18 inches tall.
Mhm.
The taller you start to get, the more desirable the open web becomes.
Right.
And then the shallower you get, the more desirable the i-joist becomes.
Right, and that makes sense because
Mm-hmm.
if you get to a 14-inch i-joist, now you can run a bunch of stuff through the system
Right.
rather than having to go below it.
And
Yeah,
you
as
can
I was
do
going to say.
plumbing, electrical, HVAC. I mean, everything can pretty much run through that space. I mean, it's the best way for maximizing your space. The only, I guess, from the engineer standpoint, the sound difference is we have had like that kind of come back to us.
What do you mean by that?
It actually doesn't absorb as much sound because you have so much open space.
Oh, the web floor
Yeah.
truss. Okay.
Interesting.
Do you mean like between floors? Like
We've
when
had
you're-
multi-story homes.
Uh-huh.
That's pretty much been literally the only complaint that we've had. It might be silent, but you can hear more between walls. So
That's interesting.
Mhm.
I've never heard that complaint.
because it's just more I guess there's just more open space
It makes
between there.
sense. Yeah, noise can travel, between the members instead.
And we don't. I mean, we do the design aspect, so we're never there for installation. I mean, we are overseeing it, but we're not really the contractor who's there from start to finish. So we don't really talk to the homeowner. It's usually just feedback that we get from our contractors.
Mhm. So like a typical 2x10, I think is about 90 cents a linear foot. An i-joist that's 9.5 or 9.25 is probably what, $1.40 these days.
Yeah, somewhere in $1.40, $1.50 range. So, you're paying more, but you're getting more out of it because it gives you more flexibility with the design. You can maximize more of the, like you said, you can make rooms larger than what you really could have in the past without having to put intermediate bearings and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've done the math, and what I figured out is that, let's say using TJI's cost me $1,800 more a house for a 2-story home. I could eat up $1,800 in service on a squeaky floor, having to pull up, vinyl floors or carpet or tile, God forbid, to fix a squeak. And if I have 2 houses a year that does that, it's worthless to me. So I'm much better off if I can avoid, having that service. So, but there still are a lot of builders that still use conventional framing, right?
There are, yeah. There's still a lot that still, they're the older builders. They're the guys that that's just what they know. They feel comfortable with it. Even to this day, I don't trust that engineered stuff.
Right.
I don't think it's as good,
Right.
even though it's proven to be.
Right.
So
another thing that from an engineered product standpoint are what we call the lam beams. You got micro lam beams, you got paralam beams. These have revolutionized the industry as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. If anything, that's probably the biggest thing.
So it's along the same thought process too. Is that the engineered beams give you the ability to span further than like a conventional double 2x10 header or triple 2x10 header, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean that sometimes can be almost 3 times what conventional lumber. can span
Right.
because of the strength.
Right, and it's funny, I can remember, like it was yesterday, walking through homes under construction with clients, and they go, what's that? Like, why isn't that steel, or why isn't, and the advantages that I could point out to them far outweighed, any of the concerns. It usually was an easy thing to lay. I mean, you can drill through it, you can nail to it, it spans further, it's, again, easier to work with. For me, it eliminated a supplier that I had to deal with ordering steel versus just ordering all my material through my lumber supplier.
Yeah.
Right?
And the beauty of that is if something gets mismeasured, you can always return it and get it very quickly replaced rather than ordering it from the steel guy and he drops it off and now what?
Right. So same thing with these products, the Microlam, Paralam beams. I know that in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, I don't know how it is around the rest of the nation, but we just adopted new building codes for fire protection.
Mm-hmm.
And this became a big problem for the i-joist manufacturers, and it's because of the fire ratings. For example, if you have a conventional piece of lumber, a 2x10, that is your floor joist, and you have a basement, and there's a fire in your basement, it's going to take a certain amount of time, and you probably know what that is, before that fire will burn through that 2x10.
Sure.
When you had the i-joists, because their center members were only a ½ inch of wood, sometimes OSB, that fire burn time was what? It halved or something.
It was half. I mean, there was almost none.
Right. So, obviously I think that's an important part of the code that needed to be adjusted. And, the fixes have been either to sheetrock an entire basement ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
Even if it wasn't finished off, that was the only way to protect, these i-joists, or to go to a solid, Paralam, lam material, as a component to substitute for conventional lumber.
It's what is it, 1/2 inch gypsum it says, or 5/8 inch wood has to basically go on the underside.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously the reason being is not only to protect the homeowners, but obviously when firemen come into a house and they're going to put out a fire.
And you're required to have that logo right outside your house, right? Like
That's for truss roofs.
yeah, for all
that's
truss
the
roofs for
trusses.
the same kind of
Yeah,
reasoning.
for falls, so they know that it's something
they're
that is
getting
not
into,
going
yeah.
to be able to support them once it catches fire. It's going to collapse.
Right. That's, I guess, of the engineered product, that's the only real negative that I know of, is that is the fire rating.
Well, now they have a solid member, at least TJ does. Truss Joist has a member that they've come out with, which is 1.5 inch wide, solid, made out of one of their beam material products called Timber Strand. So that will get you what you need without having to do any additional sheetrocking or any third-party applications, which I mean some sort of a overspray, which you can put on the eyes to give you that burn rate that you need.
Right. Now, of course, that adds cost, right?
It all adds
the,
cost.
The lam material added cost.
Mm-hmm.
And but what we are able to do is use those lambs on the first floor, but we can still use the TGIs on the second floor because you have the
sheetrock already.
1/2 inch sheetrock 5/8. That's fire retardant.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just looking up different solutions to the fire protection because it was obviously a hot topic. 2012 is when they changed the 501.3 regulations on it. So I was just looking up the different solutions that national lumber companies have kind of put out to see how to comply with it, and they're basically saying that you can do. Well, these are just kind of some ads, but this one's saying that you can put in obviously drywall, which we already talked about, and doing mineral wood insulation. I guess
mineral wool. Yeah,
mineral wool
it's
insulation,
kind of
3.5 inch insulation between the i-joists on the top and bottom flanges to be held in place by wire fasteners. I'm just gonna. I'm not the architect, so I don't know all these little detailed parts until basically.
That's all right. I just could tell you were thinking of something. I was
You
like,
looked at me and you were like, "What's going on, George?"
Smoke was
You
coming
saw
out
that
of
I was
your
gonna
face.
say.
Yeah, the only part of the eye that needs to be protected is the web. The flanges do not because they're solid, so they
Right.
already have that burn rate. So anything that's applied only has to be applied to the webbing.
Right, and I know that TJI Truss Joist thought they had the problem solved with the flak jacket.
They
is
sure
what
did.
They were calling it.
Mm-hmm.
But then
And-
something about the formaldehyde, right?
Yeah,
Something
that
got
was-
pulled back
yeah.
with that.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was they
Sorry.
were basically.
I'm like the worst devil's advocate here. I'm sorry. I'm just getting all the dirty looks today.
No, they were basically coating their TJIs with a substance that was was more fire retardant.
Right, it actually expanded, is what it did. As it caught fire, it expanded, so it allowed that burn rate to equal or be better than a solid sawn piece of lumber.
Right, but what they discovered is there's some sort of problem with the chemical reaction that it
Yes.
puts some pollutants in the air.
It was just causing an odor
pierces.
from homeowners,
Yeah,
and
it
they
was-
were complaining about it too much, so they just decided to change it up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, not only do they change it, I mean, they're actually taking the flak jacket out of a lot of houses, right?
They're remediating them,
Mhm.
yes. They're going through, removing them, and adding this timber strand product that I was just discussing alongside of where the flak jacket product was.
Yeah, that's got to be a hell of a.
I have not been out on a remediation job yet, but I'm kind of interested
Mhm.
because I've seen the details on how it's done, and it's very time consuming. And you've got to be able to get the new product turned up in a pre-existing situation. So it's got to be quite time consuming. And then the other stuff has to be cut out
Mhm.
once you get it in.
And obviously, Truss Joyce is eating that.
Uh-huh.
You know, that's Weyerhaeuser, right?
Weyerhaeuser's
Yeah.
there, yeah. The parent company, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the other part of the floor systems, and that is the spacing
Mhm.
that you could also do between the floor members, right?
Yeah.
Conventional framing, it's very typical. It's 16 inches on center. That's been the industry standard forever. Sometimes you can go down to 12 if you need a longer span. But these products enable you to span almost up to 24 inches or at 24 inches, right?
Sure, you can go all the way up to 24 on center, sure. And the only reason the cutoff is 24 is because of the plywood rating. So it's all based around the plywood. It's not even based around the product. The product you can get wider. It's just that now the subfloor can't handle the
Right.
distance between.
By plywood, you're referring to what's put down on top of the joist to create the floor.
The subfloor
The
of
subflooring.
of the whole project, yeah.
Yeah, so what's the most common? Is it 19.2 on center? Is that,
Honestly, it's still 16. I
It
mean,
is.
I think that's just because of
that's what everybody
it's
knows.
just what everybody knows. You do find some architects that will, look at the charts and, try to maximize the spans and spacing for their client and still maintain a quality floor.
Mhm.
So you do see some 19.2s. Our job when the things come in is to value design them,
Okay.
which, we look at the plans, we see opportunity to open up the spacing to try to save our customers money.
So if you get a print into your office and it said 16 inches on center, but you see that your software says it could be 19.2
Mhm.
or it could be 24
But
inches.
with the
on center.
24, would you have to use like a thicker subfloor?
Sometimes, yeah. So sometimes you go to 7/8.
Okay.
And that's only because of the distance between.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
And that would affect the sound as well, like we were saying with this, keep that whole silent floor going.
But now that they have these newer, higher grade, a lot denser, even a 3/4 inch, I still don't see the need to go to the 7/8. I mean, that was when it was just straight up OSB. So I think it's all preference.
The other thing that I think adds to that, as far as the subfloor and the deflection that can occur in between the
Mhm.
members, is so many houses are, the people are installing 3/4 inch hardwood on top of that subfloor.
Which is helping.
Now you've got
Yeah,
kind of double duty, right?
Yeah, I mean, years ago was nobody did wood or wood for the longest time. It was all carpet. Now it's nothing but wood. Nobody
Right.
wants carpet. So anytime you're using wood on top of, it only helps to enhance. It tightens everything up.
Even with engineered wood, it's still the same kind of concept because it's screwed and glued, right?
It's nailed and
It's
glued.
nailed and
Yes,
glued.
it's
Yeah.
now and glued, yeah.
Mhm.
Some applications I would screw, but the majority of it, it's ring shank nails and glue, yeah.
Yeah.
And we definitely glue. I mean, glue is another savior.
Well, actually, the glue is a main factor in the design of an engineered floor system. Their span charts are actually based on the fact that you've glued the decking. If you only nail, then there is actually a reduction that you need to take.
Wow.
There's a reduction that needs to be taken off of the span.
I didn't know that.
It's composite action is what they call it. So
Wow.
when it's all working together, that allows you to span further.
Wow,
Yeah,
that I didn't know.
yeah.
I just thought it was to prevent squeaks.
It wasn't, it's not even for the, I mean, obviously that helps with the squeaks, but it is more for their span.
Okay.
Because there's that new nail that's out now that has the glue already on the sides
Yeah.
with the Tetra grip.
Mm-hmm.
And and the company had come around, and they're trying to get people to use it because they think it's a one-stop application, because they were looking at it as the subfloor adhesive. As you drove the nail through, it would grab that subfloor adhesive, and then that would keep the nail from coming out. The glue would go with it.
Right.
Now they're coming around saying, hey, we have this thing, you don't have the glue anymore.
Right.
But all the i-joist companies are saying, well, that's fine, but you have to now take X amount of percentage of reduction in span based on the fact that you're not going to glue the subfloor.
Wow.
Because
There's a whole study that was done in 1968 where they tested against just nailed to glue nailed, and they have entire calculations of how much it increases your stiffness, how much if it's fully composite, how much it's going to bend just from the glue. I'm gonna nerd out on this later. Read all 11 pages of this.
Yeah, I mean, we started gluing probably in the late 80s. I think we started gluing everything, drywall, subfloor, and I think it was definitely there's definitely a benefit to doing it.
I think so too.
I mean, we even glued to conventional framing as well.
Yeah. I mean, everybody started to glue. That just became the thing to do. Like you said, in the 80s, long before I started.
So let's talk about the roof systems too now, because these have been around for a long time.
Mhm.
A lot of pole barns used roof systems like this, and they've now made their way into residential housing. And it's all the same principles, right? That you can span further.
Sure.
You're diverting your bearing to generally the outside walls of the house, that type of thing.
That's the big thing. And from a designer standpoint, that is always huge. When I see a plan come in with roof trusses, I'm always like, oh, I don't have to deal with any interior bearings. I don't have to deal with attic, joists and them sitting all over offset bearings all over my floors. I don't have to deal with any of that stuff. I now know everything's going out to out, and it just simplifies everything I'm doing in the middle, thus helping me to value engineer houses better, because I don't have to worry about all these interior things that are not happening anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing for me, it's still sometimes is a little unnerving to me that they're predominantly made out of 2x4s.
Mm-hmm.
The whole truss is generally made out of 2x4s and pieces of 2x4s that are stamped together with plates at all the joints. And I say to myself, wow, how do these roof trusses handle heavy snow loads and things like that, and all of the bearing is diverted to the outside walls. How does this work?
Yeah. It's all
And
it's
that's
all
through
in the webbing.
Like I was going to say, the webbing, the bracing of each of the beams and whatnot.
Sure, I mean, it's all in the webbing, and how that's why the design of the truss is the way it is. Sometimes you have to shift things here and there. Plate sizes. It all works together.
So let me ask you this. I see it all the time in higher end houses. A lot of higher end custom builders will do conventional roof framing, because I think it's a perception thing more than anything. I think that there's a perception that this roof is better built than if we used roof trusses. I mean, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, do you? Or?
I don't, but the reason you see them in the higher end houses is mainly because of the complication of the roof. Sometimes the roofs just are not trussable. Sometimes they try to put a giant living space up in there, and you just cannot get an attic truss, first of all, long enough to work and anywhere near wide enough to accommodate the size room that they're trying to get up there.
Right.
But the stick framing I see in the high-end houses is mainly because if you look at these roofs, I mean, sometimes they look like miniature castles, the way that they're set up.
How many different pitches and how many
they're all
different
over.
hips, gables, everything's going
You
on.
got valleys, gables,
Yeah.
you got hips all over the place, and it just isn't, it's not even cost effective. And, to try to figure out how to make it work and what you would need to make it work with girders and things along those lines, it's sometimes just easier to stick it. And when it's a house like that, I think the framers sometimes would rather stick it than they would use trusses when it's that complicated, because they have the ability to make adjustments.
Massage it.
Yeah, because, you know, it may say it's a, you know, 10, 12 pitch, but they may have to, you know, slide it down to 9 1/4 to make it work.
And that's more also doable to be done on site, whereas
Yes.
the other ones are kind of have to be done
When
completely cut before they even leave.
the way it shows up is
Yeah,
what you
it
got to
was
work
what you got
with.
to work with, exactly. Whereas like with what you were saying, they can much more adjust it on site.
Yeah, I mean, that's because the roof trusses are designed, you know, in your factory, and then they're produced to probably the very exacting standards, right?
Yep, yeah. I mean, I've seen plenty of roofs be turned in, and, you know, after either the design manager would look at it and just say, isn't happening, or, you know, the designer will give it a shot and just say, look, I just can't get it to work. It's just not going to happen. You know, we could do this section or that section to try to simplify it for you guys, but, you know, there's a good portion of this that just has to be stick framed.
So if someone's building a new house and their builder or their engineer wants to kind of do these different systems, are there any questions that they should be asking to kind of have these concerns before everything gets like closed in?
I mean, basically, I think it's just quality. You know, what are you looking for out of the house? You know, is it, from a builder standpoint, is it a high-end house? Is it a tract house? Is it budget-driven? And are you trying to get the best, you know, pay the least to get the, you know, the best that you can? Or are you, you know, money is not an object on some sort of a custom home, and you know, what's the best thing we can do for this customer? I don't ever want to hear from them again. I don't want them telling me my dishes are rattling when I walk by my cabinets, and I don't want to say my kids are running, my family room bouncing all over the place. So I think it's more or less knowing the application. So the questions that they would ask would be knowing their application and knowing, you know, and then me being able to tell them how to address these applications with the best product.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that is a perennial question that comes up to me all the time when it comes to roof trusses is, well, I have no attic space. You know, and my answer to that is threefold. One is, you shouldn't be storing anything in your attic anyway.
Right.
Because our insulating codes are so stringent now that we have to put R49 in the attic.
It's so tall you can't.
It's so tall, right? And if you smash that insulation down till you hit the member of the truss, even if it's conventional framing, you're reducing that R value,
Sure.
you know, proportionally.
Yep.
So it's not R49 anymore.
And that's why you tell them it's so much cheaper to get a storage unit than to.
Well.
Because of, I mean, what you're going to pay in your costs otherwise.
Yeah, the second part of what I tell them is that if you hopefully have a garage or even a 2-car garage, or you have a basement, do you really need to store things in your attic? And thirdly, you know, if you do get up there and you start walking around and you start moving around and you start walking from member to member, you're going to get nail pops in your ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So when you get all those things happening, it's just collectively, there's no benefit to it. You know, and like you were saying, I do.
Chuck, is that how you sell your basements so well? Your finished basements?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason to go into your attic in general. And I do know that on a lot of higher end stuff, when people are building a high end house, they see these massive attic spaces because of the pitches of the roof and all, and they say, well, you know, why can't we finish that off? And I have my own pet peeves about doing that anyway, but you know, it's usually a conditioning nightmare. You know, it's usually going to be hot, or it's going to be cold, or neither. And you know, it's almost impossible to manage it because you're literally inches away from the sun. You know, you're inches away from the exterior of your roof.
Right.
It's not worth it.
And
But
unfinished areas all around you.
Exactly.
On either side.
Unconditioned space, yeah. So I mean, you know, but if someone wants it, I'll certainly provide it for them. But those are the explanations I give for roof trusses and versus conventional framing. What else? Have we touched on anything else? Oh, there's one other thing that I've really started to use in certain situations, and that is Paralam posts.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, usually for folks that are listening, you know, it's a Paralam post. If you ever gone to Home Depot, you might buy a 4x4 pressure treated piece of lumber, or a 6x6 pressure treated that you're going to use as a post for maybe your leg of your deck or something like that. And like any natural material, it's going to shrink, it's going to check, it's going to twist, it's going to crack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? What I like about the Paralam material is that once you cut it, it's pretty much going to stay. It's not going to shrink. It certainly can handle more of a load than a conventional piece of lumber. Is all this true? Am I right on this?
And also in today's, like, just as a selling point, I guess I'm going to say that we've had clients that have requested it because of the aesthetic of it, because you can leave it exposed of the way it looks. As crazy as that sounds, because you know that now people are leaving, as you know, salons and commercial spaces are leaving their ductwork exposed. They're leaving. They want that industrial look, exactly. So by having the PSL, it has that awesome painting, look to it. Yeah, it's a purely aesthetic standpoint, not from an engineering point.
Well, I generally, anywhere where I'm in a situation where I know I'm going to have a pretty heavy load above it, you know, if there's a big cantilever or something like that, rather than putting 2 or 3 2x4s that are cut on site and generally probably not
gang nailed properly.
Yeah, and not all the same length and so on. And then, you know, I know 5 years later, if I walk into that house and expose it, they will have shrunk a 1/4 of an inch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't get that with the Powerland post, right?
No, not at all. I mean, that's one of the major advantages of them. Plus, you can get them to span just like beams. You can get them to go higher. You know, you can get a taller Powerland post up to catch, you know, girder trusses, bigger, you know, larger beams above, and get them all the way down the foundation without breaking the plane. Of, you know, going between floors and potentially getting any kind of, you know, bowing or
I didn't know that was an application.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's
so even they have the
yeah. I mean, obviously, the taller you go, the less it can carry.
Sure.
But no, that's a big thing, is to try to get one continuous member working. It doesn't work a lot, because sometimes the loads that are coming down are just too much for them to handle.
Right.
But when possible, it's definitely a selling point for that product, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's smaller than a traditional column that you'd be having in that same place.
And they also, they're from what I understand, they're also made now for exterior exposure as well as
Yeah, they have a pressure treated, sure. Mm-hmm.
What is that used for?
Decks,
Oh, okay.
exterior
Yeah.
posts.
Yeah.
corner posts on like a front porch or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, they're it's a good product, and I'm seeing architects specify them more and more, and it's mainly because of load is the reason why, and they feel comfortable because there's published literature that'll say this will carry X amount over this height, where there's published literature on ganged up 2x, but to your point, is it put together properly? What's gonna happen to it in a few years or even a year after it settles and it starts to twist or bow or check or even shrink, and that's the big thing. And once it shrinks, if it shrinks down and you've got some large load on there, it's going to go with it. Then you're going to start getting your drywall cracks, your cracks in your walls, your cracks in the corners, and the things that everybody starts calling you back complaining about.
Right. I agree. I mean, it's a great product. I think, like I said at the beginning of the show, the technology has caught up with the concept. I think, you know, we've been using it. They're tried and true now. We know how, you know, far a 5.5 inch by 14 inch Powerland can really span and what kind of weight it can carry. You know, all that work and all that study's been done on it, and now we have the actual practical application of it working too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what's the fire rating on steel? Because doesn't steel lose more of its load bearing capacity under heat?
Yes.
So
that's why when there are house fires and things,
firefighters are terrified when they see a steel girder. I mean, when you think about it, that's also another.
You know, the heat's got to get up there pretty high for it to start to, you know, fail. But you know, the big thing with that is in any kind of a rebuild situation, when you've been dealing with something with a lot of steel, that is when you start to lose the value of it, because the heat, once the heat rises on it, it changes its you know, the component of it, and it's just losing its value and in strength, and nobody knows what it heated up to say what it lost. So yeah, you see a lot of these houses that caught on fire, and they're like, oh, you know, we still have the girder in the basement, and a lot of times it's got to be replaced. We can't trust that it's still as strong as it was designed to be.
So, you know, we're actually getting near the end of the show already, unbelievably, but great topic. And so for the folks listening, whether they're homeowners, potential home buyers, or even builders, what's the message here? Is it that number one, don't be afraid of this product anymore.
I would think by now that the fear of the product is gone. I mean, I think it's more or less, if you're going to use the product, try to use it, wisely and use it to your best advantage rather than just looking at this as a direct substitution for what you used to use, which would be conventional lumber. There's so many options out there to keep the same integrity.
And open your possibilities in terms of, if, like you were saying, instead of just using it as a substitute for the way you were going to do it with your traditional rooms and decks and roof systems, by using these, you're able to, open up your possibilities in terms of room configurations.
Yep.
So if I'm an individual or a builder and I've got an architect's plan, obviously you and I have worked together forever, and I trust you implicitly with the design of this stuff. But across the country, different suppliers, should people feel generally comfortable that if they bring a plan into a lumber designer or a floor system designer, that's being designed
or
the same way, or an engineer, that it's being designed the same way you would design it? In other words, the software, you can't.
The software has come so far that it literally is the best tool that you can use to your advantage to get what you need for your customer. And not only that can you get it, but you can actually give them the examples and give them calculations and give them numbers to back up, the facts when you start talking about value designing and saving money. Everybody says, well, I don't want to cheapen it up. I don't want to build a cheap product.
Right.
And if you can show them that they're really not sacrificing much to save money, that's a big selling point.
And overall, I mean, we talked about the benefits of using the product for service, but overall, I don't think it changes the cost dramatically, of a house. I think it's negligible when you compare conventional lumber to all the engineered products.
It is. I mean, and only because people have gotten used to using it. I mean, at first it was apples and oranges because of the cost difference per lineal foot. But in the grand scheme of things and in the overall cost, like you said, once you're done, you're walking away from something that you don't have to worry about anymore, like you did with conventional lumber, with the floor. The floor pops and the shrinkage of the 2x material and everything like that once things start settling and drying out. So, I mean, I think I definitely think it's a product that has earned its keep in the building industry, and something that is now looked upon as the first choice instead of what used to be the second choice many years ago. Right.
I mean, the last benefit I'll point out that again, from a builder standpoint, is the speed. It definitely, you're able to put a house together more quickly because everything is the exact same size. Everything's been built to the exact same spec and made to the exact same spec, and it just everything goes together that much more quickly and that much more easily.
As a builder, it's all about how quickly you can get it up to get paid. I mean, the faster you can build the house, the faster that you're closing on that house. And with those longer span I-joists, like we had talked about with the continuity and running them continuous, I mean, your guys are laying them out, taking them right to the one side, trimming them where they have to go, and moving right along. I mean, they can have a first floor decked, framed and decked, and probably, depending on the size of the house, but they could probably have, you're starting to put walls up within the first, day of material being dropped off.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And the other thing it eliminated for me is, when I would get conventional lumber delivered to the job, it's coming in bundles of 100 2x10s or something. The last thing I'm doing is looking at every 2x10 that was just delivered to me, and the quality from one supplier to another varies so dramatically. It eliminated all of that for me.
Sure, it's you don't have, it's one less hassle that you have to worry about. Getting a bad batch of 2x10s. Just when you're stick building the walls, you run into that. You're going to run into a half dozen 2x4s maybe in one pack that are just bad.
Right.
And there's nothing you do about it. They were buried in the middle. It's not like you knew it was going to come out that way, or You know, there's no way to stop it.
How about the difference between the different manufacturers? Because, you know, we've talked predominantly about truss joists. Is it still McMillan?
No, just truss
joists.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's other manufacturers, like every product there is in the world, there's copies of it.
Sure, there's Boise and LP, GP,
Right.
Blue Lynx now has their stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different manufacturers out there.
Right. So, but they all do they all follow the same standards?
Yeah, I mean, truss joist has always been the industry standard in that, you know, department as far as the engineered products are concerned. Most of the other companies have always followed suit with whatever they were doing. There's certain technologies that truss joist owns that others, you know, can't utilize. Yeah, proprietary stuff. They still own the the patents on that stuff. And then there's others that have crept out, like a LVL, a micro lam beam. I mean, that is now pretty much industry standard across every manufacturer because anybody can make one of those. But when you come to parallam beams or their other beam, timber strand beam, they own the patents on that stuff. You can't, you know, nobody else can manufacture that.
Okay.
So that becomes their bread and butter. They figure out ways to make that the way you want to go, you know, because the LVL is so generic anymore.
Awesome, man. Great information, wealth of knowledge, as I expected. I'm sure our listeners are happy that they tuned in and listened.
Thanks for joining us this
Yeah,
week.
thanks for
and
having
for all of our listeners, be sure to tune in next week when Real Estate Matters Radio returns next Wednesday at 5:30.
Have a good week, Georgette. Thanks again, John, for coming in.
Thank you.
That's our show. Don't forget, it's always the right time to make the right investment. Have a good week. Man, that went fast.
I was so not used to the hour long because I'm used to the half hour.